When you think of hi-fi headphones or headphones for the recording artist, there are a number of brands that probably pop into your mind. Beyerdynamic, Sennheiser, Sony, and Audio-Technica, for example. All of these companies make a wide variety of headphones of mixed results. There are tried and true headphones such as the DT770, 880, the MDR 7506, and of course the ATH M40X. Others, such as the DT1990 or the Neumann NDH20, have quite vocal fans, but not a particularly wide user base. Ultrasone is a German company that you might not have heard of. In the United States, these guys barely make any mention. I'm sure in Europe they have a large following, but unless you are familiar with their products or marketing, it's unlikely you've come across many examples in the wild. Ultrasone makes a lot of headphones, and I mean a lot. These guys constantly release, discontinue, rename, and reintroduce headphones. It's a proverbial free-for-all. I purchased several Ultrasone headphones over the last year, some of them long discontinued and others just recently discontinued but still available. Today, I want to take a look at Ultrasone's entry-level professional headphone, the 1480i. This headphone originally sold for about $200 but can be found refurbished for almost 50% off. Is the 1480i a contender in the sub-$200 headphone market or a German oddity? Ultrasone has two big features for all of their Pro Series headphones. First, the S-Logic technology. Second, the consistent build quality. The 1480i has Ultrasone's S-Logic implementation. You will find some articles online discussing this technology and will readily see there's a split of opinion about whether it works well. Essentially, S-Logic is the placement of the drivers at a non-traditional position. Ultrasone puts the drivers to the bottom of the ear cups. Ultrasone claims that this creates natural spatial sound. They say that traditional driver implementation puts them directly at your ears, which results in listener fatigue over long periods. Ultrasone claims that their S-Logic design results in natural sounds wherein directions and distances are reproduced without distortion. They say that you do not hear a typical stereo left and right sound, but instead a large stage in front of you. Furthermore, Ultrasone guarantees that S-Logic brings maximum neutral sound impression with more vivid perception of voices and instruments. With regard to the 1480i, Ultrasone says that you will hear, quote, particularly airy, crystal clear sound. They promise transparent and neutral reproduction, perfect for mixing and mastering. With the 1480i, you should be able to hear higher perceived volume at lower sound pressure. Ultrasone says that this headphone can be used as a listening tool for anyone seeking professional studio headphones for reference. Plastic. Lots and lots of plastic. That's the second feature that Ultrasone is known for in their Pro Series headphones. The 1480i is no different. There is metal in the construction, it's just not visible. In fact, there's no metal at all in the outer portion of the headphones. The yokes, headband, and ear cups are all plastic. It is, however, very thick and robust plastic. You can toss these headphones around without much concern, but I wouldn't stomp on them. The 1480i has decent padding on the headband. It's plush and thick, but over time you will begin to feel a little bit of pressure on top. This padding seems like it can be replaced if you can find something that fits. The ear pads are also replaceable. Ultrasone includes one set of velvet ear pads. These are pretty shallow, but surprisingly well padded anyway. Ultrasone's ear pads are detached by turning them counterclockwise. You can pull them off directly, but that will cause undue wear on the plastic ear pad retainer, so don't do that. This, I must add, is a fantastic method of ear pad swapping. It is obviously proprietary, which I really dislike, but it's simple, easy, and quite frankly, the next best thing to magnetic ear pads. The 1480i comes with one coiled cable. Thankfully, the cable connection into the headphone is a standard 3.5mm connection. Actually, you can insert either end of the cable into the headphones and it doesn't really make a difference. Ultrasone threw in a carrying pouch, but it's not much to talk about. The ear cups swivel 90 degrees and can lay flat on a surface. They can also fold into the headband, but that seems to be an awkward design. When folding the ear cups, they tend to kind of slightly touch each other. As for comfort, the 1480i is rather comfortable. The ear pads are large enough to sit around my ears. However, the top of my ears do get slightly pinched. The clamping force is a little bit on the tighter side, but the earpads mitigate most of the discomfort. The headphones are fairly light, but as I mentioned earlier, the headband panning will become noticeable after a little bit of time. I found that I could easily wear the 1480i for about 3 hours without any difficulty. I did have to adjust the headphones off and on because of the headband, but this wasn't really a big issue for me. Overall, I wish that Ultrasone would put some metal into the build, but the plastic used here seems robust. For $200, I would prefer a spare set of earpads included in the box. After all, far cheaper headphones come with replacement earpads with the packaging. Considering the 1480i's earpads are proprietary, it would have been wise to include one spare set. However, other than these issues, the 1480i seems adequately accessorized and the build is perfectly agreeable. This headphone is not going to floor you with its looks, build, or accessories. But can it impress with its sound? I tested the 1480i with numerous devices. This includes my Moody and Liquid Spark stack, the RME 80i2 DAC, and the Matrix Mini-i Pro 3. I also tested with a few mobile devices, including my FIO M15, Ibasso DX160, and the Eco ITM01 and ITM03. I used the stock accessories. I listened to my test playlist on Amazon Music HD. The 1480i is easy to drive. A simple, portable amp DAC will have no trouble getting these drivers to peak performance. From what I gather in the marketing, the 1480 is supposed to have neutral bass. My test suggests that the bass is, in fact, fairly neutral. In Mountains by Hans Zimmer, there's a lingering sub-bass rumble from the beginning of the song. The 1480 clearly recreated this detail. The rumble was easily audible and reverberated even at moderate volumes. There was good separation between sub-bass and mid-bass. This allowed the organ to cut through the other instruments during the crescendo. When the vocals chimed in, they rose from the background until they were about shoulder to shoulder with the other instruments. In Conquered by Overwork, there is a rolling marble effect at the beginning, panning from right to left to center. The 1480 clearly presented the sound of rolling marbles, but some of the panning effect was actually missing. There are multiple drums in this track, and the 1480 clearly rendered all of them. Drum impact was hard, precise, but not harsh. The thwacking of drumsticks on drumheads was sharp, but not piercing. I listened to several hip-hop songs, including Pure Water, New Patek, Reel It In, and Uproar. In all occasions, the 1480 presented the subwoofer effect without difficulty. It sounded like the subwoofer was at the other end of a medium-sized room. There was clear separation between sub-bass and mid-bass. Vocals were 2 steps ahead of the instruments and retained their requisite sparkle. I next tested the 1480 using my Sicario playlist. I used these songs to listen for audible distortion in the bass region. A few things became immediately obvious. First, the 1480 provided full or near full rendition of sub-bass. It sounded neutral to me. Second, there was no audible distortion whatsoever, even at high volumes. Overall, I was a bit surprised to hear a neutral, or at least very close to neutral, bass rendition from an open-back headphone. It's not easy to do. The 1480 has clear separation between sub-bass and mid-bass. Ultrasone's marketing suggests that the 1480 should provide neutral mids. My tests indicate the mids are forward. In Orla Gartland's song Why Am I Like This, there is vocal grain and sibilance recorded into the mix. The 1480 kept the grain neutral and smooth. However, the sibilance was elevated. This was below the type of sibilance you would hear on the HD560S, but it was also a departure from the neutral rendition from the Avantone Planar. Compared to the Allo Audio S4X, the 1480's presentation of sibilance was a bit more obvious than that. Separation of mid-centric instruments was clear. The drums and guitar retained their individual characters with little melding. Orla's voice was 2 steps ahead of the instruments. In Haim's Want You Back, the 1480 again demonstrated that it accentuates vocal sibilance. It was to a similar degree as what I spoke of before. At 8 seconds into the song, the primary singer says the word "we" and drags it out, making it sound gravelly. The 1480 clearly presented this detail. There are 2 backup vocalists in this track, and initially they were fundamentally clear, their voices distinct, separate, and far apart from each other. When the instruments began playing at maximum, I could still hear all 3 vocalists, but it took a little bit more effort. The guitar, piano, drums, and bass all had correct timbre. There was minimal melding of notes among them. All vocals seemed 1 to 2 steps ahead of the instruments. In Superposition by Young the Giant, the 1480 correctly rendered the ukulele, drums, and bass. All 3 were distinct and clear. The primary male vocalist sounded fairly smooth, but his sibilance was also marginally elevated above neutral. This was not to the same degree as with female artists. There is a backup singer whose voice is layered under the primary. The 1480 was not able to reveal this detail, and frankly, very few headphones can. Between 1 minute and 10 and 1 minute and 20 seconds, there are supposed to be sharp intakes of breaths. The 1480 perfectly recreated this detail. I listened to several tracks by Guy Clark. Guy used acoustic guitars and simple compositions in his music, typically 1 or 2 vocals combined with a handful of instruments, and never any electronic manipulation in editing. In every single track, the 1480 clearly rendered Guy's gruff voice and provided clean, transparent instruments. There was, in other words, little melding among the instruments, and I could easily hear all of them with their particular emphases. Overall, while Ultrasone might suggest or say that the 1480 has neutral mids, I don't think that's the case. I believe the 1480 has forward mids. Female and male sibilance is elevated, though neither is like that of the hideous HD560S. There is good clarity in the mids region, allowing you to hear details in instruments and vocals. Once again, Ultrasone says that the 1480 provides neutral or transparent treble. My experience is that this headphone has slightly elevated mid to upper treble region. In Scherzo for X-Wings, the 1480 presented the brass and horns with their typical energy, but there was a slight emphasis to higher pitched notes. This was immediately different from the rendition I heard on the Aventone Planar, but similar to what I heard on the Olo Audio S4X. There was good separation among treble instruments. The timpani was clear but not bloated or exaggerated in the mix. The 1480 presented width, some verticality, but no depth. In other words, while instruments appeared to the extremes of the ear cups, left and right, and some sounds came from above and below, there was no real sense of instruments being further back into the room. In Flight from the City, the 1480 presented the piano as if it was about 8 feet away. Its notes were clear. The cello slightly melded with the piano, but I could easily pick the two apart. I could hear the pops and sizzles and electric buzzing effects, which are details recorded into the bass layer of this track. I could hear the creaking of wood and the shifting of the cello's weight, though these details seem just a little recessed when compared on the Aventone Planar. In Take 5 of the Dave Brubeck Quartet, the 1480 rendered the piano in the right, the drums in the left, saxophone center, and the bass a step behind. All instruments were clear and easy to separate. However, the cymbals were a bit elevated, sounding almost as loud as the saxophone. The cymbals are struck at different spots, which should present slightly different tonalities to their sounds. The 1480 did recreate these differences. The saxophone seemed smooth, but tended to have just a bit more emphasis than it did on the Aventone Planar. Overall, the 1480 has close to neutral treble rendition. There is an elevation in the mid to upper treble region. It isn't harsh, but it's a noticeable departure from neutral. This means that some instruments, such as cymbals, might sound a little louder than they should. The treble region has good clarity and instrument separation. We have all read marketing material and reviews wherein people promise a headphone provides all the details. While Ultrasone does not go to that extent, they do heavily suggest that the 1480 will provide clear details. If that is Ultrasone's position, then I think they are correct to a certain extent. The 1480 is not a detail monster. It is not like the Austrian Audio HiX55 or 65, Focal Clear, or the Sennheiser HD800S, but the 1480 is no slouch. This headphone provides obvious details easily. Subtle details are usually clear as well, though you won't hear every single nuance. Sharp intakes of breaths, multiple vocalists, twangs of guitar strings, pops and sizzles, electric buzzing, creaking of wood, shifting of a cello's weight, gruffness of a vocalist's voice, different tonalities of cymbals, and various drum sizes, all of these details are perfectly audible. Some subtle details might get pushed into the background, but that depends heavily on your particular track. The bottom line is that you will not struggle to hear details on the 1480 if those details were supposed to be heard. For a more quantitative test, I used the song New Light by Kazuki. This track has layers of details, including the sound of children playing, synth, piano, wind, rustling of grass, and footsteps. I count the number of footsteps I can hear in the first 60 seconds. The Sennheiser HD800S presents 22 footsteps, the Focal Clear, 18. The Austrian Audio HiX65 presents 16 to 17 footsteps. The Austrian Audio HiX55 presents 16. The Hi-Fi Man Sundara, Aventone Planar, and Beyerdynamic DT1990 all present 10 to 11 footsteps. The audeze LCD2 Closed and the LCD2 Classic each provide 7 to 8. The Monolith M1070 and M1570 provide 8 to 9. and the older M1060C provides 7 footsteps. The Audeze LCD1 and the HD6XX each present 6 to 7. The Neumann NDH20 presents 5 to 6. The 1480i presents 8 to 9 clear footsteps. It is evident that the 1480 is not a replacement for the more analytical headphones, the Focal Clear, HD800S, or the Austrian Audio options. The 1480 does not parse out minute details, but it does provide more than average. Its presentation is similar to what you would hear on far more expensive headphones, such as the LCD2 Classic, and demonstrably more and clearer details than on the Neumann NDH20. Ultrasone says something fairly vague about the 1480 Soundstage. This is an open back headphone and we generally expect wide soundstage, or at least wider than a closed back alternative. This is not always the case, and there are indeed outliers. For example, the X55 has wider soundstage than the HD6XX or the LCD1, the former being a closed back while the latter are open backs. The 1480's rendition of soundstage is a bit wider than average. Average, for me by the way, is the HD6XX. Since a lot of people have this headphone or one of its related siblings, it's the standard I use. I have a scale for soundstage, and here it is. The Audeze Mobius and Beats headphones have claustrophobic soundstage. The Neumann NDH20 and the ATH M60X are below average. The HD6XX and LCD1 are obviously average. The hifi Mansundara, Aventone Planar, Austrian Audio Hi X55 and 65, and the DT1990 have above average soundstage. The hifi Mandiva has wide soundstage, and the HD800S has super wide soundstage. The 1480 provides wider soundstage than the 6XX, but not quite as wide as with the Aventone Planar or the hifi Mansundara. I would say that the Allo S4X has slightly less soundstage than what I hear on the 1480. The 1480 has clarity, width, and some verticality. However, it does not provide depth. In other words, you will not hear a 3D soundscape, which is something you should be able to expect from headphones like the HD800S. Ultrasone markets the 1480 and their other Pro Series headphones as being transparent and providing neutral sound. These headphones are designed for professional work and supposedly cater to that market. I do not think that the 1480 is actually neutral. Perhaps it comes somewhat close to the mark, but it does not actually hit it. The bass is neutral, that much I can say with some confidence. Sub-bass seems to be full and clearly rendered. Mid-bass is impactful, hard, without being harsh. There is good separation between these two sub-regions. The bass does not tend to bleed into the mids. The mids are forward, particularly vocals. Female sibilance is a bit emphasized. This isn't harsh, and certainly not to the extent of the HD560S, but it is clearly a departure from neutral tuning. Mid-centric elements are clear and appear to have correct timbre. Treble is elevated, probably in the mid to upper treble region. It's a noticeable deviation from neutral but not piercing. Some instruments, such as cymbals, might get more emphasis than they really should, but you also get some good separation of treble-centric instruments. The 1480 has above average detail and soundstage. I wish there was a frequency response graph I could look at to confirm what I hear. Unfortunately, it is very difficult to find graphs for any of Ultrasone's headphones. The 1480 has none, at least none that I could find online. My experience is that the 1480 has a slight lean towards analytical without actually being fully analytical. In my view, analytical headphones include the Focal Clear, Austrian Audio X55 and X65, and obviously the HD800S. Some might say that the DT990 is analytical. Maybe, but I think the 990 is just over-emphatic in treble. Anyway, the 1480 is an interesting departure from the typical tunings I hear. It does not fit into any one category. It's not balanced, it's not true neutral, it's not true analytical, it's not warm sounding. It's different, and different is good. Different creates variety. To better understand how particular gear fits into the wide world of audiophile nonsense, we need to do comparisons. Most reviewers do not bother, but I think it's essential. Here, we will compare the 1480 against the DT1990, the Allo Audio S4X, and the Hi X65. I have already thoroughly reviewed all of these headphones, and if you want more information about them, you'll have to watch their respective videos. In this section, we will merely summarize the differences, if any, when compared to the 1480. For For this test, I used stock accessories for all headphones. I plugged them into a passive AB switch, which was plugged into my Army 80i2 DAC. I also tested using my Soundcause LA-QXT1 plugged into my Sterling HPA4. I listened to my test playlist on Amazon Music HD, and of course I tried to volume match. The Allo S4X seems to have just about as much bass emphasis as the 1480. I think there might be a slight bit more sub-bass rendition on the S4X. Mid-bass impact is hard to distinguish, however. Overall bass clarity is noticeably greater on the 1480. Separation of sub-bass and mid-bass is clearer on the 1480. The mids are similar but not the same. Sibilance seems to be very close in emphasis on these headphones. Vocals are a little clearer on the 1480 and separation of mid-centric instruments more obvious as well. Vocals are closer to the ears on the S4X. There is a bit of additional bass in the midsection that the 1480 seems to lack. The 1480 has ever so slightly more treble emphasis than the S4X. It's not a significant difference, but upon A/B tests I could just make it out. There is greater separation of instruments on the 1480, however. Instruments are more intimate, closer to the ears on the S4X. The 1480 is clearer overall in the treble region. Neither headphone presents harsh or piercing treble. The 1480 and S4X render about the same amount of detail, but the 1480 has wider soundstage. The DT1990's bass has a roll-off compared to the 1480. This is evident in the sub-bass where the 1480 has a greater emphasis. Mid-bass impact seems to be fairly similar. However, separation of sub-bass from mid-bass is more obvious on the 1480. The 1480 is also a little clearer in the bass region. The mids are different in a few ways. The 1990 has a greater emphasis in sibilance and vocal grain. The 1990 also places vocals closer to the ears. Separation of mid-centric instruments is fairly close, and I don't think one is necessarily better at it than the other. Timbre of instruments seem to be the same. The 1990 has more upper treble emphasis than the 1480. Instruments sound marginally clearer in this region on the 1990. Going back and forth, I could tell that the 1480 presented treble instruments a little closer to the ears, and the 1990 placed them a bit further away. The 1990 has a bit more detailed retrieval and slightly larger soundstage. The X65 has a noticeable sub-bass roll-off compared to the 1480. Reverberation is longer on the 1480. Mid-bass impact is harder on the 1480. However, separation of sub-bass from mid-bass and overall clarity in this region is greater on the X65. The X65 emphasizes vocals more than the 1480. Indeed, vocal grain and sibilance is greater on the X65, but still not quite harsh. The 1480 presents vocals closer to the ears. There is more bass presence among instruments on the 1480, and the X65 has greater separation and clarity in the mids region. Timbre of instruments seemed about the same to me. Treble sounded similar on both of these headphones. They appear to have comparable emphasis, which is somewhere in the mid to upper treble region. The 1480 presents treble instruments closer to the ears. The X65 provides more separation and width. The X65 has greater detail retrieval and wider soundstage. These comparisons make a few things abundantly obvious. First, all of these headphones sound different. Second, the $200 1480 is not 3 times less capable than the $600 1990. Third, this test confirms what I said in the previous section, that the 1480 has an analytical tilt without actually being analytical. When we compare against something like the X65, we can tell that the 1480 does not do what it does. But when compared to more neutral headphones like the S4X, what we can see is that the 1480 does not also achieve what that headphone does, namely closer to neutral sound. Ultimately, the 1480 is a capable headphone, just like the X65, the DT1990, and the S4X. But it's just capable in a different way. It doesn't actually have a particular sound signature that matches any of these 3 headphones. It has its own tilt, and it does provide more than average detail, soundstage, separation, and quite frankly, comfort. I was pretty skeptical of Ultrasone. I had never heard their headphones, and since reviews of their gear was few and far between, I had no idea what to expect. I first started off with a cheap, long, discontinued Ultrasone headphone, and I was a bit surprised by what that headphone had to offer. Curious, I bought a few more. My overall impression about Ultrasone will have to wait until I can review all the headphones I have purchased from them. What I can say is that Ultrasone's cheapest headphone now, the 1480i, is an interesting concept. The S-Logic system, whether it actually works or not, is up for debate. The few reviews around Ultrasone products have a split of opinion on this matter. Some people say that S-Logic makes audio sound weird to them. Others say that S-Logic does what Ultrasone says. And depending on how emphatic someone's opinion, you might walk away thinking that S-Logic is a faulty technology or believe that it is groundbreaking. I am not of the opinion that S-Logic is groundbreaking, nor am I of the opinion that it is faulty. Obviously, Ultrasone is doing something different. After all, you can clearly see that the drivers are placed in a non-traditional location. So Ultrasone isn't blowing smoke. Perhaps Ultrasone's drivers perform best in this configuration, but that does not mean other manufacturers that place drivers in the center or even at center ankles are missing out. S-Logic is simply a different way of rendering sound. That's all. It's not magic. Whether S-Logic will work for you in all its forms throughout Ultrasone's product lineup, it's something I can't say. But frankly, I don't have any complaints. Turning to the 1480 itself, it's important we keep the S-Logic marketing as sober reflection. When you put aside the marketing mumbo-jumbo, what does the 1480 offer, and is its price justified? This brings us to value. Yes, the 1480 is value. Its MSRP of $200 is fair. And if you buy it refurbished at almost 50% off, I think you're getting a good deal. The 1480's overall construction leaves room for improvement. I would prefer something a bit more metal and less plastic, but that's what you'll get with most of Ultrasone's Pro Series headphones, for better or worse. However, the plastic is thick and robust, and during my tenure with this headphone, the 1480 has shown no worse for wear. As with a lot of brands, Ultrasone does not bend over backwards to give you much in the way of accessories. I'm thankful at least that the cable is a traditional 3.5mm connection, which means that you can easily replace it. But I'm less impressed with the proprietary earpads, and a little disappointed that Ultrasone didn't throw in a spare set. While I love the way these earpads attach and detach, you simply can't find them anywhere else in third-party stores. You can excuse this omission when third-party earpads are easily available for the stock version. However, the 1480 earpads are available only from Ultrasone, and I have yet to find any single earpad manufacturer that would provide 1480 earpads. The 1480 does not have a typical sound signature. It's got a close to neutral, if not actually neutral, bass rendition. It has forward mids, though they're not harsh. It has emphasized treble, though not piercing. It has clarity, detail, and soundstage, though not in a sense of an analytical headphone. It's a weird amalgam. Well, maybe weird is the wrong word. How about interesting? It's an interesting amalgam. You get bass, and for an open bag headphone, that's a good step forward for many. You get clarity without harshness and without loss of natural timbre. You get good treble energy without fatigue. Whether the 1480 can be considered neutral is debatable. I don't think it is. But if you're not looking for true neutral, then that really doesn't matter. Ultimately, the 1480i is a definite contender in the sub-$200 headphone market. You could find a number of subjective reasons to dislike it, just as with anything else in life, but there's no real objective reason to disregard it. Yes, the Pro 1480i is staying in my collection, and it might make the grade for yours.